Welcome to the Wisconsin chapter of the APTA pregame for the official APTA 100th birthday celebration. What an incredible accomplishment for an incredible profession. Our profession is one of service and continuously helping people to regain function from devastating injuries and dysfunction. This is something we can all be proud of and enjoy doing. We have been there helping people during some of the most trying times over the last 100 years, starting with helping wounded soldiers from World War I. We have been there to help people through World War II, the polio epidemic, the Korean, Vietnam, and recent Afghanistan and Iraqi wars. Most recently, the opioid epidemic, and now helping people to recover from the effects of COVID-19 are two new areas that we're delving into. We can thank 5 special ladies for starting the Wisconsin chapter of the APTA approximately 92 years ago. Laura Borwell, Mildred Elson, Claire B. Miller, Florence Phoenix, and Muriel Patrick met and formed the Wisconsin chapter in January of 1929, from what I understand during the middle of a snowstorm. What an incredible event that was, and who could imagine what this initial meeting would lead to? We have become a very progressive organization that has led the way for our profession in many ways. What incredible spirit, vision, and energy those women must have had. How bold they must have been for their time. They had only gained the right to vote approximately 9 years before that. That spirit and energy is still with us today. A couple of examples of their energy carrying forward can be seen in our recent accomplishments of passing the Interstate Compact legislation and the leadership that we have shown in areas of PTs ordering x-rays and direct access. Wisconsin has been the first state to actually have legislative language allowing us to order x-rays. We also have approximately 80% of our hospital organizations allowing PT direct access. Many other states regularly ask us for advice and guidance in helping them with some of these issues. We also have several of our Wisconsin members involved with leadership roles at the national level. Letterheads rule. We love that. That is cool stuff. Also, in case you're not aware, we recently changed our name. Before this year, our name was the Wisconsin Physical Therapy Association. Over the last couple of years, APTA led an initiative to get state chapters and sections to standardize naming and logos. This was a great idea and was adopted by most states and sections. Our name is now American Physical Therapy Association, Wisconsin. To help document and celebrate Wisconsin's involvement in our history, Gwen Straker and Michelle Thurman have combed through the APTA Wisconsin archives and created a timeline that will be viewable on our website. You will be seeing some of this information later tonight. To clearly celebrate APTA's birthday, we have formed a Centennial Committee. This group has organized this event and other things to come. One of them being that the Centennial Committee has undertaken the project of involving our legacy members. They plan on interviewing past presidents of APTA Wisconsin, along with those individuals who have made impressive contributions to the growth of our profession through service, research, and clinical expertise. The members of this important committee are as follows: Gwen Straker, who is the ambassador from Wisconsin to the APTA. Other members of the committee include Alba J. Deacon, Lindsay Dolan, Barbara Helgeson, Allison Hodgson, Linda Shepardson, Michelle Thorman, and Pedro Zavala. Please thank this group for their time and energy devoted to the various programming and ways for us to document and celebrate APTA's 100th birthday. Please enjoy the celebration tonight, and I look forward to working with all of you in the future to continue our great legacy and continue elevating our profession. As you know, this is just a warm-up for the APTA celebration starting at 7 p.m. Central Time. Thanks again and enjoy the program, and I look forward to another 100 years. Have a great day.
The Centennial Celebration Committee is honored to have Gwyneth Straker as not only its leader, but also one of its legacy members. Gwen has created her legacy through her dedication to the profession, both from educating the next generation of physical therapists in the classroom and while they're on their clinical rotations, and also her involvement in the state and national associations as many chairs and heads of committees and sections. And she also promotes health and wellness among the community, and what seems to be both a focus on geriatric population and pediatrics as well. I could go on for an hour of all her honors, accomplishments, and her experience, but I will sum up that Gwen has retired as an esteemed colleague of the University of Wisconsin La Crosse physical therapy program, where she has left her legacy through touching many lives of physical therapists. And I know this for a fact because I have talked to many of those physical therapists who have had the honor to have had her mentorship and her education. She's also left her legacy by offering a Gwyneth Straker Clinical Excellence Scholarship that is awarded annually to a deserving physical therapy student. Her commitment and her leadership are admirable. So welcome, Gwen, to our legacy member interview.
Thanks a lot for having me.
Thank you for being here. So I have only just listed a very, very small sliver of your experiences, and we've asked you to participate in this project because of your commitment to the profession and your contributions to the profession. What do you believe is your greatest contribution?
That was probably the hardest part of preparing for this, was to look back historically, because we tend to focus on what we're doing at the moment. And one thing is very, very clear: none of us accomplish anything alone. There's always a team with us and behind us, and supporting whatever efforts that we have to make. So keeping that in mind, I looked back and there were a few things that I feel I would be remiss if I didn't mention, simply because of the other players that were involved with those accomplishments. Working with Warren May and some of the other leaders in clinical education, like Lori Cotton from Marquette and Phyllis Harrison from Concordia, and Kathy Zalewski at the time from University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. We worked hard on developing the constructs of professional behaviors and implementing them in the academic and in the clinical community. So that was a huge project, and I think it had national implications. In fact, we even presented it at one of the world conferences in Montreal, or Toronto, I think it was. Another accomplishment was related to that, in that I founded the Wisconsin Clinical Education Consortium, which is now our clinical education SIG for APTA Wisconsin. And of course, I did that with the same team working hard to make clinical education a more meaningful construct in Wisconsin. Perhaps what people currently think of me in relationship is my efforts with ethics, and bringing ethics as an obvious part of the academic curriculum. Founding an ethics course within the UWL curriculum, and making sure that our students graduated with a sense of that kind of a commitment to their decision making, and trying to then influence clinical decision making regarding ethical issues throughout the state and nationally. But perhaps the hardest fought for contribution that I made, and probably the one that I would say has the longest lasting impact, is the creating a pathway for the University of Wisconsin La Crosse to transition to the DPT. People outside of the academic community don't understand that UW La Crosse is a comprehensive campus, and the UW system only allows Research One campuses, which are Milwaukee and Madison, to grant the doctoral degree. At least at the time, that was all that was allowed. And as the chair of the physical therapy department, I realized that we needed to move heaven and earth to make this DPT happen on the La Crosse campus, and everything in front of us told us it was not going to. So setting out to educate the educational community, administrators, UW system, and working to change the culture of how degrees were granted was not a small feat. And it took about 5 years for those mountains to move. But we did it. And we did it in time. And we did it with a great deal of hard-fought battles within the system. So that probably is one of my most, others would say my most significant contribution.
I'm wondering, who is someone who has greatly impacted you and your practice?
That's a really good question. Somebody that I admired from afar was Ruth Petillo. And Ruth Petillo is the grand dame of ethics in the PT community, and a Mary McMillan scholar, and she's been on faculty at Harvard and many impressive institutions. I think she's a professor emeritus of more than one institution at Creighton right now. But she is the person that if she was speaking, I was there. If she had written something, I read it. And I found inspiration, and she mentored me, not even knowing she was mentoring me, from her words and from her actions and her thoughtfulness, and most of all, her humility. An amazing human with great accomplishments and as humble as the day is long. And eventually our paths crossed enough that she began to recognize me and remember me and became available to me. I will be forever grateful for the time that she spent with me, refining my thinking on ethical issues. Mm-hmm. So I would have to say Susan Harrison and Ruth Petillo were the big names.
Yeah. I am curious because you've mentioned your work with ethics. So you teach it, you developed courses for it, and I'm just curious about where you developed this affinity towards ethics in physical therapy.
I would have to say that it started by feeling uncomfortable in the clinic, where certain things would arise and I would go, I don't know what to do about that, or I need to do this, but that's not what I'm being told to do. Mm-hmm. And not really understanding my role as a clinician in terms of managing the ethical nature of practice. Silly examples, really silly examples. When we were going over the Code of Ethics in PT school, now remember, I graduated in 1973. Okay, so think about when you were born. And I was graduating from PT school, and one of my patients who had had a stroke had been making a necklace and some earrings out of paper clips and contact paper. Now, you don't even know what contact paper is, but everybody in my generation does. And she gave them to me as a gift. And another patient gave me a pillowcase that had holes in it. It was not new, but it obviously was meaningful to her because she had embroidered the edges on it. All right. And it was a beautiful pillowcase, but clearly not new. And I had remembered when we went over the Code of Ethics, it said you can't accept gifts from your patients. But it felt wrong to me not to accept those gifts, because I thought that it would do more harm to the patient than good to the profession by refusing a homemade. So I took them, but not without feeling guilty. And that's the kind of thing that sort of started me on, wait a minute, there's got to be a place to feel good about. So that's kind of the silliness that went along with it. But then there became bigger issues and bigger issues. The more responsibilities I assumed, the bigger the questions, the bigger the consequences.
My last question is, so I am very new, almost into the profession as a full-time physical therapist. So I'm always curious of what your advice is to the next generation of physical therapists.
I think some advice. A couple of things is never lose your passion. Never become, even when you become busy with the day, don't treat the patient as if they're just the next thing on your checklist of things to do. If you can be fully present for each patient, the day will be short, you will get through it, and that patient will never forget you. PT is your passion right now, keep it that way. And one of the ways to keep it is also to set some boundaries. Boundaries that keep you healthy and you know, for lack of a better word, diverse, that you have other interests and that you say, you know, I can't give any more this week. I can't give any more today. You've crossed a line. You know, set those boundaries for yourself. And that's part of the literature that I'm looking at heavily right now are the boundaries that we need to set for ourselves so that we don't burn out. I also think that we've misunderstood burnout, and we think burnout comes from doing too much and just running out of what we can give. But I think burnout also comes from allowing people to take too much, and from the fact that we work in a system that sometimes makes our ethical decisions for us, and they're in conflict with what we believe in. And so it's that moral tension for us that causes us to burn out a little bit, because we can't realize the way we want to practice. So I would pay attention to burnout, and I would pay attention to my moral compass.
Yeah, that is very insightful, and I will try to keep my passion and maintain not being burnt out. Though the system right now is set up for us to almost become burnt out. So that's our passion. I'm going to keep that passion and hopefully try to change something in the future.
But I'm not burned out,
yeah.
So it can be done.
Exactly.
Right?
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be one of the members of the legacy members for the Centennial Celebration Committee. We are so thankful that you put this committee together, that you've led it, and that you also are a well-deserved member of it. So we appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, here we are this evening with Dr. George Davies. Dr. Davies is presently a professor at the Department of Physical Therapy at Georgia Southern University. He is the Assistant Director of the Biodynamics and Research Center and works clinically at Coastal Therapy, which is located in Savannah, Georgia. He was a co-founder and co-director of the Clinical and Research Services at Gunderson Health Systems in Sports Medicine and the Sports Physical Therapy Clinical Residency Program in La Crosse, Wisconsin. Dr. Davies has served over 48 years as an educator, 45 years in physical therapy, and has been appointed as Professor Emeritus from the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse. His commitment to education has resulted in him receiving the University of Wisconsin Regents Teaching Excellence Award, nominated by all the deans of Wisconsin, and has received the APTA Dorothy Bethke Eleanor Carlin Award for his excellence in academic teaching. Dr. Davies is an agent of change, serving as a co-founder and co-editor of both the Journal of Orthopedic Sports Physical Therapy, also known as JOSPT, and Sports Health, a multidisciplinary approach. Furthermore, he has published over 220 peer-reviewed publications and abstracts and continues to enhance our evidence-based practices. His excellence as an educator, clinician, and researcher have not gone unrecognized, since he has been awarded the Catherine Worthingham Fellow, which is the highest honor among the APTA membership categories bestowed to physical therapists that attain a high level of excellence and advance the profession. He has also been inducted into the American Academy of Sports Physical Therapy and the American Orthopedic Society for Sports Medicine Hall of Fame. And he is the only physical therapist to have been recognized as a Hall of Famer for the American Orthopedic Society for Sports Medicine. Therefore, it is a pleasure for me to introduce and recognize Dr. George Davies as an APTA Wisconsin Centennial Legacy Scholar for his unrivaled commitment to our profession as an educator, clinician, and researcher. So thank you for accepting your invitation, and welcome, Dr. Davies.
Well, thank you very much, Pedro. It's certainly quite an honor to be selected for this award, and I'm excited and very honored to have an opportunity to share information with you this evening.
Since the start of your career, the profession has changed and grown in many ways. From your perspective and based on your experiences, what is the one memory that truly transformed the physical therapy profession to where it is today?
It's difficult to really identify just one thing, but again, I'm going to indicate two things that I think are interrelated. The first thing is moving away from a passive modalities oriented profession to an exercise movement oriented type of a profession with rehabilitation. In the past, we used to spend hours and hours doing different modalities, hot packs, ultrasounds, things of that nature. Hopefully we're getting away from a lot of that. Although, frankly, it seems like there's many courses that still are very dependent on a lot of the passive interventions, like those that are giving all the certifications in manual therapy, dry needling, etc. So we're reverting back to some of this passive intervention stuff. Furthermore, I think the most important thing is that we have to really put more emphasis on evidence-based design of therapeutic exercise programs and have an exercise movement-centric orientation. That's the single most important thing, I think, that's going to transform our profession and take it to where it needs to be.
You know, I think you nailed it. And I think a lot of the things too that have evolved the profession are based on, you know, the new literature and the new evidence that's behind it. That being said, you know, you yourself have heavily influenced our evidence-based practices, and you continue to help innovate them with your research. What influenced you to seek not that career path, not only as a clinician, but also as a researcher?
I think one of the recommendations that I would make is that most younger clinicians should try to find a mentor. And if you can find a good mentor, you're going to be very lucky because they can really guide you and help facilitate your career. Unfortunately, I started so long ago and actually started in athletic training for 7 years before I ever got into PT. I didn't really have a mentor. So again, a lot of the things that I developed were basically, I guess I'm going to say, from a lot of mistakes made over a long time. But I think one of the most important things, I don't know how many times I've been in a clinic treating a patient, and I would just look up and say to myself, what the hell am I doing? Is this really appropriate or not? So the beauty of being able to work in an academic environment as well, and now particularly being down in Savannah at Georgia Southern, we have a very active biodynamics and research lab with 3 PhD researchers there, exercise physiologists, biomechanists, etc. So the point is that many times I'm treating a patient in the clinic and I'm just wondering, God, is this really the right thing to do? I can take it back into the lab, control those confounding variables, and really try to sort through what really does work. So back to your question, what really influenced me is, quite frankly, a combination of a lot of frustration, a lot of introspection, reflection, and a passion to come up with what are the best ways to really treat this patient and try to keep a laser focused. What is the best thing for the patient?
You know, you in 1979, you co-founded the Journal of Orthopedic Sports Physical Therapy, also known as JSPT. It is one of the highest ranked physical therapy journals that's highly recognized not only within the physical therapy profession, but also the sports medicine field in general. I guess share a little bit with me what drove you to develop your OSPT, and did you envision it to grow where it is today? And what were some of the challenges that you encountered too?
Well, let's go back 41 years ago. Jim Gould, who was my co-founder and co-editor, we were teaching together. We wrote the first book on orthopedic and sports physical therapy. We actually started a private practice together called Orthopedic and Sports Physical Therapy. And then we both, interestingly, got involved in our respective sections. Jim got involved in the orthopedic section. I got involved in the sports section. Now they're academies, but again, they were originally the sections. But what was very interesting, at the first APTA CSM ever in 1976 in Washington, D.C., Jim and I were both there. Interestingly, Jim was in the orthopedic section. I was in the sports section. It was the start of both of the sections, so they needed somebody to develop the newsletters or bulletins. Unbeknownst to either one of us, Jim volunteered to do the ortho section bulletin. I volunteered to do the sports section bulletin. And we didn't know that until we got back to lacrosse. We got back to lacrosse, and then we found out that, oh my gosh, we're both doing these. So we would do our respective bulletins through the year. And then interestingly, at Christmas, to save money, what we would do is we would combine the two issues into a musculoskeletal issue. And it was really funny. We had to literally, and I'm not exaggerating, we literally contacted APTA. They sent us the mailing labels. And then on a Friday night, my wife and my young kids at the time, Jim and his wife, would get together and we would have a mailing party. We would literally, and I'm not exaggerating, we would take the label off, we would put it on the newsletter, we would stack them, and then the next day we would take them down to the post office and literally mail them. And I'm very serious. And as a result of that, we did that for about 3 years, I think it was. And then we just looked at each other one day and we just said, wait a minute, we have something going on here. And that's really what segued into the actual Journal of Orthopedic and Sports PT. We knew it had a lot of potential. I mean, even 41 years ago, I knew it was going to be good. I didn't realize how popular and how large it would become. But again, in hindsight, I'm just proud to have had the opportunity to contribute to the sections, the academies, and the profession now. Challenges, oh boy. Jim and I went to several publishing companies. No, you don't have a good idea here. No, you don't have a good idea here. So we were rejected by several companies. Then Williams and Wilkins was the company at the time. They looked at it and they said, well, wait a minute, there's a built-in subscription base here with the members of the orthopedic and sports sections who pay dues. So that's going to take care of some of the costs. So they took a chance on us. And I guess at this point in time, when you look back in hindsight, it was a pretty darn good chance that they took at the time. Some of the other things, though, oh boy, in the beginning, starting a new journal, everybody's busy, and the busiest people are always even busier. So who do you want to get to write things for you? The busiest people. Well, it was really laborious trying to get people to write some of the original articles for the original issues. And then think about today, we want to do something, we do it with the internet. Back then, everything was snail mail. So you got an article, you had to identify a couple of reviewers, send it out snail mail. They would review it, send it back snail mail. You'd send it back to the original authors for revisions. They would have to revise it, send it back snail mail. We would get everything compiled, send it snail mail in a package to William. Oh my gosh. So the logistics of processing a journal 40 some years ago was unbelievable. But again, as I said, you can always look back at hindsight, and it's amazing. Anything you look back at hindsight usually takes a lot of failures and a lot of work. But then ultimately it can become successful, as evidenced by JOSPT.
Hello, everyone. It is a pleasure for me to introduce Dr. Brian Heiderscheit, who is a professor in the Department of Orthopedics and Rehabilitation and the Doctor of Physical Therapy program at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, with affiliate appointments in the Department of Biomedical Engineering and Graduate Program in Clinical Investigation. Dr. Heiderscheit has authored over 150 peer-reviewed publications, book chapters, and has been recognized for his contributions to enhance the understanding and clinical management of orthopedic injuries, specifically sports-related injuries. Dr. Heiderscheit is a founder and director of VW Health UW Health Runners Clinic and is a team physical therapist for UW Badger Athletics. He has received numerous awards for his contributions to moving the profession forward. In 2019, he was named a Catherine Worthingham Fellow, which is the highest honor among APTA membership categories bestowed to physical therapists that attain a high level of excellence and advance profession. Additionally, in 2020, he was appointed as a Frederick Gainsland Professor of Orthopedics from UW-Madison School of Medicine and Public Health in his recognition for his career accomplishments. Therefore, it is a pleasure for me to introduce and recognize Dr. Brian Heiderscheit as an APTA Wisconsin Centennial Legacy Scholar for his excellence as a clinician, researcher, and educator.
Thanks, Pedro. I appreciate it.
What is the one memory that truly comes to mind that has transformed our profession to where it is today?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think there's a lot of ideas that come up as to what it could potentially be. I think one of the most important one that's really defined our profession in so many ways, including the need for advanced education, is direct access in the clinic setting. That we're able to see patients, either through a referral or some sort of modified referral or straight off the street with their needs and address the issues as they come up. I remember as a student, you would always think about what it would be like to be a military physical therapist, because the military physical therapist got to do all these great, cool things, right? But then you had the civilian life, and you started to realize that it felt like it was a little less exciting and all-encompassing. And now that's kind of merged a bit more. There's less of a division between those sort of practices, and I think the ability to really be somewhat of a primary provider to individuals for musculoskeletal related needs and neuromuscular needs is huge, and that drives so much of what we do from a research standpoint. It drives what our educational needs are. And is extremely motivating to do more as a professional, to make sure that you can do your best for your patients.
What influenced you to seek a career not only as a clinician but also as a researcher?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of different pieces to it. One was just my own innate interest to understand the why. And to question things, much to the chagrin of probably my professors as a student. Maybe probably asked too many questions as to why, or challenged a little too much. But I think that's a good thing, and thankfully my professors when I was in PT school recognized that, I think, because they encouraged me and were really encouraging about pursuing a research type of career. In particular, George Davies was one of my primary mentors as a physical therapy student. And he took me under his wing and really guided me on the orthopedic and sports track and pushed me to see what else could be done besides patient care. Not that can't be fulfilling in and of itself, but there can be also other opportunities that exist if you have an interest or an inclination. And then Jim Gould was another one of my professors in PT school. And he was also instrumental in making sure that I kept going. I think the phrase he used at the time was, "You're a student already and you're poor, so stay poor a bit longer." So just plow through, get the degrees that you need to really do what you want to do.
You've seen it to where it is now. Where do you think the profession will be in 20 years?
I think we're going to be stronger than ever. And I don't mean that lightly either. It's not a cavalier response. It really is. I think we will be stronger than ever. I mean, we are in a situation right now, and it's not intended to downplay the challenges we're currently facing, because they are real and they are significant. But I have the utmost confidence that we're going to overcome these obstacles, and that when we do that, given our tenacity and perseverance that our profession has always shown over the years to a variety of obstacles that come up, we always come out ahead in the end. Whether we need to modify what we do or how we do it, there's always a gain that's to be made in the end. And we have extremely talented early career professionals like yourself that bring the energy in and the mindset of making real change, knowing that the profession even seeing the profession in these challenging circumstances, you still decided that this is the career you want to pursue, which says a lot. You know, it means that you see the extreme value that can be gained out of this career and what it means to your patients. And you will overcome these barriers, you know, with the help of everybody as part of the profession. But I'm excited for early career professionals to really make a huge contribution.
What drove you to first develop the UW Health Sports Runners Clinic that you developed a while back, and as well as what challenges did you encounter when you were creating, you know, developing this in the Madison and Dane County area?
Yeah, a good question. I had to think back on that one because that was a while ago. I mean, it's been almost 20 years since we started this, and you know, in all honesty, I think that I'm definitely surprised at where it is now compared to where it was when we first conceived of the idea. I can still remember sitting at a table with Kip Schick and Chris Jensen making plans on what this would look like. How do we bring this idea to fruition? You know, I'd done some runners clinic, really small little things at another institution or two before coming to Madison, but realized that there was a true opportunity here to make something special. And you know, the thought that it would fade away after a couple of years, not a chance. It just getting its own momentum and grew pretty rapidly. And you know, again, now it's been almost 20 years with no signs of slowing down. And Mark Sherry and Dan Enns, who are instrumental in the sports rehab clinics at UW Health, have been critical to our success. And we've had fantastically talented providers in our group who really built the reputation that the clinic has. People like Jenny Kemp and Amy Schubert, Liz Chumanov, Sherry Clark, Evan Nelson, Krista Woolley, Janelle Deathridge, a few others in there, I'm sure, that have come and gone over the years, but just some really talented individuals. As in terms of the challenges that we've encountered, I think some of the biggest one, the more important one, is that we really designed the runners clinic with two primary goals in mind. And that is, one, we wanted to provide the best patient care by applying the latest evidence. And then number two, we wanted to advance the field of running medicine by contributing to that science and evidence. So it wasn't just patient care, it was also advancing the field in an objective way. And unfortunately, sometimes integrating those two pieces, clinical care and research, doesn't go smoothly. Things will come up because you'd have to prioritize, or you may have to make adjustments along the way to compensate for one or the other, when one needs to be prioritized over the other. But what I realized after thinking back on this was that these challenges were actually opportunities in many ways, because these were the opportunities that allowed us to make our biggest contributions. So when we saw how these things didn't really connect together, that could be our job. We could make it so these things could connect together more easily. So it's not just something that UW Health has, but it's something that a whole lot of other groups can do. And so some examples of that was by us developing a standardized video assessment for running analysis. That's now somewhat of the standard that exists. It's one of the only published tools out there that utilizes this process that is completely available to anybody to use. Step rate modification as a gait retraining tool for runners. That came from a patient. I can still recall the exact patient I had, how she presented was things that just didn't quite make sense. And through that problem solving of her particular visit, we started to come up with this idea of step rate modification, which launched a whole line of use that many investigators across the world are continuing to study. We looked for something like a patient-reported outcome tool so we could gauge progress in runners. And ultimately, we developed a University of Wisconsin Running Injury and Recovery Index, which is now, again, the standard for assessing changes in running-related injuries. That emerged out of a gap that existed because we didn't have anything to use, so we had to make it. And we had to do it the right way. Something other than just putting words on paper, we wanted to make sure it had the validity and the proper psychometric properties. And Evan Nelson, a colleague of mine here, a former student, has done a tremendous job in that area of advancing.
When you were a 20-year-old and you first became a PT aide, If that 20-year-old was looking at yourself now, what would you be saying?
No, that's a good point. I probably, knowing how cynical I was at the age of 20, I probably would have said, you should have done more. But yeah, no, in all honesty, I think the thing that was always important to me, even at that age, was making sure that the research that I took on benefited others, that it had a clinical piece to it, that didn't just live in an ivory tower someplace. And again, that was instilled in me by George Davies and Jim Gould, constantly telling me, it needs to have impact. It needs to do something. It can't just be an academic exercise. And so knowing that our work has received the attention of other clinicians, other scientists across the world, and having patients contact me and saying, thank you for your work in this area, it really helped me or whatnot, it's just been extremely rewarding.
Is there any specific award that you received throughout your career that is more that you hold closer to your heart, or that you're most proud of? If so, is there a story behind it?
One award in particular that does hold a special place was receiving the 2008 Wisconsin Physical Therapy Association Mentor of the Year Award. And one of the main reasons why it was special was because my nomination came from one of my graduate students at the time, who you're going to recognize the name, Dan Colbian. So he was a graduate student of mine, and now, of course, he's gone on to become a colleague of mine at UW-Madison, and in his own right is an amazing mentor to his own students. So that one's pretty special.
What is your piece of advice, students, young clinicians that want to make a positive impact? What is that one key thing that you've learned over the years that you would advise us to do to help continue move the profession forward?
Yeah, that's a tough question for sure. It reminds me of a question. I think my answer to that question is the same as what it would be to another question that I've gotten asked a lot from early career professionals. And the question is, how can I get a position like yours? They see what I want to do. How can I do what you do? And I've always struggled with answering that, because there isn't a set path, right? It's not like you do X, you do Y, you apply for Z, and all of a sudden, boom, you do what this is. You need to make your career what you want it to be. And that's so important for every person. My current duties and responsibilities gradually developed over the years. First I had to develop the skills to do what I wanted to do, and then I had to demonstrate that what I wanted to do could actually be done. And then once I could demonstrate it, then you started to get permission almost, or access, or opportunities to do all of these other unique areas and start to wear different hats. We can all identify someone to whom we've looked at and said, I want to do what that person does. But it's important to realize that what that person does not predate that person, right? It's not that, in other words, that position didn't exist and that person moved into it. They made it what it is. They created what they do. And that, I think, is something that every new professional needs to realize is, I can do whatever it is that I decide I want to do, but I'm not going to wait for an opportunity to come up. You've got to create your own opportunities. So imagine how impactful that can be to the profession as a whole if we all approach our careers aggressively and made it what we want it to be.
That's very true. I think that's something that I've heard a lot. You're going to get out of it whatever you put into it. So
yeah, exactly. That's a perfect way of summarizing it.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Heiderscheit, for accepting our invitation, and we want to congratulate you again on being recognized as an APTA Wisconsin Centennial Legacy Scholar.
Thanks, Pedro. I appreciate the opportunity. Appreciate this chance to chat with everybody, and really appreciate being recognized in this way.
Perfect. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Gwyneth Straker, Centennial Ambassador for APTA Wisconsin. Thank you for joining us for this momentous occasion. I am overwhelmed with the progress I have witnessed since entering the profession. I graduated from PT school in 1973, and at that time, our profession was 44 years young. We entered the profession with a baccalaureate degree and required supervision of a physician to practice. What preceded and has followed that point in time is fascinating. One of the undertakings of the Centennial Committee was the preparation of a document that outlined our growth and development. I had the privilege of working on this project with Michelle Thorman. The timeline is a work in progress. We encourage any of you taking the time to enjoy this timeline to offer suggestions for events that we may have overlooked. We also welcome artifacts such as old photos. Now, I would like to welcome Michelle, who will highlight a few landmark moments that will add some behind-the-scene details that most of us do not know. Michelle?
Thank you, Gwen, and thank you for the privilege of collaborating on this important legacy opportunity with you. As Gwen and I were going through bins and bins of chapter archives during the pandemic months, it became apparent that many people, some with us now, some who have gone beyond, but whose influence still exists, have contributed to the evolution of our profession in Wisconsin. Gwen's put together a lovely timeline PowerPoint that highlights words on a slide that are major landmarks or moments in our chapter's history that we don't want to forget. And yet there's always a backstory to every slide. So I'd like to light up one of those slides, or at least one, that relates to how direct access came about in our state back in 1989. But it started way back in 1983, when there was a time of unprecedented encroachment. Everybody wanted to be a PT. Everybody wanted a slice of what we did, or to tell us that we couldn't do it within our scope of practice. So when Michael Jackson was introducing the moonwalk, and Sally Ride was jettisoning on the Space Challenger, breaking all records for female astronauts, our chapter decided this practice act is old and we've grown out of it. So one of the first things that the chapter decided to do back in 1983 was to accomplish practice with independent referral. And that name has changed over the time, but that's where it started out. A balanced budget amendment was put through in '83, hoping that we could tag this on to the Budget Act, and it failed miserably. And so did the next 3 years fail miserably, with political stalemates and delays and posturing and campaign influences. And sometime in that window, then President Dick Jensen said, you know, if we're going to have direct access in this state, it's got to include the words diagnosis, physical and clinical diagnosis in the science of physical therapy. Well, if ever there was an opportunity to pour gasoline on a fire, that did it, in spite of the well-intentions and the wisdom that went into that decision. The physicians were threatened. The chiropractors accused us of expanding our scope of practice. And unfortunately, the provision of diagnosis within a practice of independent or optional referral failed miserably. Another year went by, and finally in 1987, practice with optional referral was passed by the Assembly Health Committee. The next hurdle we had to get past was the Senate Health Committee, led at that time by Rod Moen. Now, it turns out that Senator Moen was adamant that if any PT practice without referral legislation was going to pass, it had to include the provision that chiropractors could refer for physical therapy. Chapter leadership at the time said, no way, that makes us subservient to the chiropractors. It elevates the chiropractors to the status of physicians and dentists who at that time could refer to PT. So we resisted it. And it became very interesting that Senator Moen was beholden to the chiropractors As Tom Ingle, our legislative action chair, said at the time, isn't it interesting that Senator Moen received during the 1986 campaign period the second largest amounts of contributions of any candidate? And let me let you guess where those contributions came from. You got it, the Chiropractic Association. Unfortunately, Senator Moen would not be up for re-election for 3 more years. And this obstacle that we had no way of getting around was impenetrable unless we chose to do some compromise language. And that's exactly what President Jensen did, followed by President Mary Jensen in 1988. The compromise language that ultimately became an amendment to the Budget Act included the ability for chiropractors to refer to physical therapists, but not the diagnosis language that we so deeply wanted to have included. Nonetheless, this is a good example of 7 years of hard work with one legislator being beholden to a financial group and the ability to take any amount of progress and say, we can start with this and we'll fight the battle for the rest of it on a different day. So ultimately, our direct access language that still exists in our Practice Act today was passed in August of 1989, 7 years from the inception of the motion by President Bourne. And then building on that comes the time between 2000 and 2002, when the chapter embarked on a really historic sweeping legislation package that included the rest of those charges that came up in 1983. We had gotten direct access or some limited form of it, but the other 3 charges from 83 included an upgraded definition of physical therapy, licensure of PT assistants, and mandatory continuing education. Around 1997, the Federation of State Boards created something called a Model Practice Act. And the Legislative Action Committee, led by Lynn Steffes at the time, started to digest that in minutia detail to determine how could that Model Practice Act help us contemporize the Wisconsin PT Practice Act. So in early 2000, the membership was posed with a motion to open our Practice Act for the purposes of pursuing those 3 objectives: a better definition, licensure of PT assistants, and mandatory CE. Remember, this process was occurring at a time of unprecedented encroachment by occupational therapists, athletic trainers, physicians, chiropractors, you name it. It was bitter and it was competitive. And the chapter knew that by opening up the Practice Act, we were putting our past progress at great risk, because when a Practice Act is open, it allows any one of those interested parties to diminish any aspect of the Practice Act, including the chiropractors seeking to reverse the direct access language. But the membership stepped up and instructed lobbyist Tilbert and Tenuta to find co-authors, which were ultimately Representative John Gard in the Assembly and Senator Brian Burke in the Senate. Now, I was there for some ugly and intensive negotiations throughout the rest of 2000 and 2001. And am happy to say that in spite of the strife, by the time the bill was brought to the Assembly Health Committee in late 2001, only 1 year after the membership had passed this motion, that only the Chiropractic Association opposed it, but they did so vehemently. They would look to strike direct access for any advances that we were seeking at the time. But once again, the WPT membership stepped up. Our grassroots support had never been stronger, and we were novices at this. We were not good. We had $11,000 in the conduit, which might be a record. I can't remember now where we are with that. And we had a very successful legislative action day in early 2001. When it passed out of the Assembly Health Committee, which was a victory in itself, Wisconsin Chiropractic Association finally decided to negotiate. And at that point, things began to get a little looser, but we were running out of time. There were just days before the end of the legislative session, and we knew we were doomed to not be able to pass this bill during this session in 2001. But in a stunning change of events, listen carefully, our co-author, Senator Brian Burke, was embroiled in a criminal operation using the state's personnel and resources to advance his own campaign as Attorney General. And it was determined upon confiscation of his computers that the Wisconsin Chiropractic Association, are you hearing a theme here, was deep in the pockets of Senator Burke. He was beholden to them, much like Senator Moen was back in 1989. When this became known, our bill rapidly progressed through the Senate Health Committee and the full Assembly in the Senate. And with 2 days to go before the closure of the legislative session, our bill passed. Senator Burke was ultimately convicted months later. So nearly 20 years after the inception of these ideas, the profession finally had a new definition of physical therapy. PT assistants were finally licensed, and we had mandatory continuing education. And this allowed physical therapists to also perform diagnosis and spinal manipulation. The biggest concession we had to give up, and I remember agonizing it over deeply, was that we allowed chiropractors to say and claim that they used physical therapy modalities because they were into ultrasound. In hindsight, history has made this a minor concession. Upon signing the historic legislation in 2002, Governor McCallum looked at me, then chapter president, and asked, if I sign this, will I get a free massage? So clearly the Wisconsin chapter had one major historic legislative sweeping changes. We were in a stronger position, but we had much to do yet to elevate the public perception of physical therapy, which we have continued soldiering on in an effort to do so to this day. I hope you enjoyed these behind the scenes stories.